The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my trembling hand as I stared at the divorce papers spread across our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared countless family dinners, where our daughter Sophie had blown out birthday candles, where we'd planned our future together before everything fell apart. "Just sign them, Rebecca," my husband Michael said, his voice carrying that cold detachment I'd grown to hate over the past 6 months. "We both know this marriage is over. Stop dragging it out." But I couldn't sign, not because I still believed we could fix what was broken, but because I knew the truth about why our marriage had really ended. It wasn't about growing apart or falling out of love, as Michael had convinced everyone, including our marriage counselor. It wasn't about my controlling nature or my inability to support his dreams, as he'd told his family and friends. It was about the affair, the one he thought I didn't know about. The one he'd been conducting for 8 months with his business partner, the one who was now pregnant with his child while I sat here being painted as the unreasonable wife who wouldn't let go. 10-year-old Sophie sat at the counter doing homework, her dark hair falling across her face as she pretended not to listen to her parents' latest argument. But I could see the tension in her small shoulders, the way she gripped her pencil too tightly, the careful way she kept her eyes focused on her math problems. What none of us expected was that she'd been listening to everything, understanding more than any child should have to, and that she was about to shatter the careful lies that had been holding our family together. 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Michael was a successful architect, charming and ambitious, the kind of man who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 10, and I'd built my entire identity around being his wife and Sophie's mother. I'd given up my career as a graphic designer when Sophie was born, pouring all my creative energy into making our home beautiful, supporting Michael's business, being the perfect partner who never complained about the long hours or the business trips that kept him away from home. But perfection is fragile, and it only takes one crack to bring the whole facade crashing down. The crack came in the form of a text message that popped up on Michael's phone while he was in the shower. A message from his business partner, Amanda Chen. "Can't wait to feel the baby kick again. Our little secret is getting harder to hide. Our little secret. Our baby." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs as I stood there in our bedroom, holding the phone that contained the evidence of my husband's betrayal. Not just an affair, but a pregnancy. A whole other life he'd been building while pretending to love me. When I confronted him that night, Michael didn't deny it. Instead, he turned it around on me with the skill of someone who'd been planning this conversation for months. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice full of the kind of regret that sounds sincere until you realize it's only regret at being caught. "But Rebecca, we've been growing apart for years. You have to admit that. We're more like roommates than husband and wife." He painted a picture of a marriage that had died slowly, of two people who'd simply fallen out of love. He made it sound inevitable, natural, even mutual. And somehow, he convinced everyone around us that I was the one being unreasonable by not accepting this reality, everyone except Sophie, who'd been watching and listening with the sharp intelligence of a child who knows when the adults in her life are lying. The divorce proceedings had been a masterclass in manipulation. Michael's lawyer painted me as the bitter wife who couldn't accept that her marriage had run its course. My own lawyer, recommended by Michael's friend, seemed more interested in pushing for a quick settlement than fighting for my rights. "Mrs. Harrison, your husband is being very generous with the custody arrangement," she'd said during our last meeting. 50-50 custody, the house until Sophie graduates, substantial alimony. Most women in your situation would be grateful. But I wasn't most women. I was a woman who knew that her husband had been systematically planning this divorce for months, moving assets, building a case for why I was an unfit partner, all while carrying on an affair that would give him the family he really wanted. The final insult came when Michael suggested we tell Sophie together, presenting a united front about how sometimes parents just stop loving each other but they'll always love her. "We need to make this as easy as possible for her," he said, his voice full of fake concern. "Children adapt better when they see their parents handling things maturely." maturely. As if there was something mature about abandoning your family for your pregnant mistress while gaslighting your wife into believing it was her fault. But Sophie had been listening to our conversations, picking up on the tension that filled our house like smoke. She'd heard the late-night phone calls Michael thought she was sleeping through. She'd seen the way he'd started working later and later, coming home with the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. Most importantly, she'd overheard the conversation I'd had with my sister 2 weeks ago, when I'd finally broken down and told someone the truth about Michael's affair and the baby that was coming. So when Michael sat her down that evening to explain that mommy and daddy were getting divorced because sometimes people just grow apart, Sophie looked at him with those intelligent 10-year-old eyes and said something that stopped him cold. Is it because of the baby you're having with Amanda? The silence that followed Sophie's question was deafening. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: shock, panic, calculation, before settling into the practiced mask of concerned confusion he'd perfected over the past months. Sophie, sweetheart, I don't know where you got that idea, he said, his voice gentle but strained. Daddy isn't having a baby with anyone. Sometimes when grown-ups are upset, they say things that aren't true, but Sophie wasn't a typical 10-year-old. She'd inherited Michael's intelligence and my stubborn streak, and she'd been putting pieces together for weeks. She looked at her father with an expression that was far too mature for her age. I heard you talking to her on the phone, she said quietly. Last Tuesday when you thought I was asleep. You said you couldn't wait to meet your son and that you were sorry it was so complicated. Michael's composure cracked slightly. Sophie, you misunderstood and I saw the ultrasound picture, she continued, her voice getting stronger. It fell out of your jacket pocket when you were hanging it up. It had Amanda's name on it and a date that's 6 months from now. I watched my husband's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time. This man who'd convinced therapists, lawyers, and family members that our marriage had simply run its course was being exposed by his 10-year-old daughter's relentless honesty. Why are you lying to me, Daddy? Sophie asked, and there was something heartbreaking in her voice. Why are you pretending this is Mommy's fault when you're the one who did something wrong? That's when I realized that my daughter had been carrying this burden alone, watching her father lie to everyone while her mother was painted as the villain. She'd been protecting me in the only way she knew how, by gathering evidence, by listening, by preparing for this moment when the truth would finally matter. But Michael wasn't ready to give up his narrative. He was already formulating his next move, his next manipulation. I could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the preparation to gaslight our own daughter the way he'd gaslighted me. That's when I knew I had to act. Sophie, you're confused, Michael said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to make someone feel stupid. Sometimes children hear things and misunderstand what they mean. Daddy would never lie to you. But Sophie stood up from her chair, her small frame radiating the kind of righteous anger that only comes from watching someone you love be systematically destroyed. Stop it, she said, her voice shaking but determined. Stop lying. Stop pretending. Stop making Mommy look crazy when you're the one who's doing bad things. Michael's mask slipped further. Sophie, you need to calm down. You're getting upset over nothing. It's not nothing, Sophie shouted, her 10-year-old voice cracking with emotion. You made Mommy cry every night for months. You made her think she was a bad wife when you were the one sneaking around. You made her go to therapy and take medicine for being sad when you were the one making her sad. The truth was pouring out of her now, months of careful observation and painful understanding spilling into the open. I realized that my daughter had been watching our marriage disintegrate with the clear eyes of someone too young to be fooled by adult rationalizations. And now you want her to sign papers that say it's her fault, Sophie continued, tears streaming down her face. You want everyone to think Mommy is the problem so you can go live with Amanda and your new baby and pretend we never existed. Michael was losing control now, his carefully maintained facade cracking under the relentless assault of his daughter's honesty. Sophie, that's enough. You don't understand adult relationships. I understand lying, Sophie shot back. And I understand that you're trying to steal Mommy's money in her house and her reputation so you can start over with someone else. That's when Michael made his fatal mistake. Instead of trying to comfort his daughter or address her concerns, he turned to me with cold fury in his eyes. "This is your fault," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've been poisoning her against me, filling her head with your paranoid delusions. You're using our daughter as a weapon because you can't accept that I don't love you anymore." The accusation hung in the air like poison, and I saw Sophie's face change as she realized that her father was now attacking her mother for telling the truth that she, Sophie, had discovered on her own. What happened next would be burned into my memory forever. Sophie looked at her father, this man she'd loved and admired her entire life, and something shifted in her expression. The last traces of childhood innocence fell away, replaced by a clarity that was both heartbreaking and powerful. "You don't deserve Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "You don't deserve to be called Dad anymore." The words hit the room like a physical force. Michael stepped back as if he'd been slapped, his face cycling through shock, hurt, and rage. But Sophie wasn't finished. "A real dad doesn't lie to his daughter," she continued, her 10-year-old voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "A real dad doesn't make his wife sick with worry and sadness. A real dad doesn't abandon his family for someone else and then try to make it look like it's their fault." The silence that fell was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was heavy with truth, with the weight of a child's broken trust, with the collapse of carefully constructed lies that had taken months to build. Michael tried to speak, but Sophie held up her hand with a gesture that was so adult, so final, that it stopped him cold. "I heard you talking to your lawyer," she said, her voice getting stronger with each word. "I heard you planning how to make Mommy look bad so you could take more money. I heard you laughing about how easy it was to make everyone think she was crazy." My heart stopped. I hadn't known about that conversation, but the look on Michael's face confirmed that Sophie was telling the truth. "And I heard you tell Amanda that once the divorce was final, you'd make sure Mommy couldn't afford to fight for custody," Sophie continued. "You said I'd be better off with a stable family anyway." The betrayal was complete now, laid bare by the unflinching honesty of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Michael had not only been planning to destroy me financially and emotionally, he'd been planning to take my daughter away from me. "Sophie, you don't understand," Michael started, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "I understand that you're not my dad anymore," she said with devastating finality. "My dad wouldn't do these things. My dad would love my mom and take care of our family and tell the truth. You're just someone who looks like my dad but acts like a stranger." She turned to me then, her young face set with determination that took my breath away. "Don't sign the papers, Mommy," she said. "Don't let him win. Don't let him take everything away from us just because he wants to start over with someone else." And in that moment, looking at my brave, brilliant daughter who'd risked her father's anger to defend me, I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up the pen, but instead of signing the divorce papers, I wrote 4 words across the signature line: "See you in court," because sometimes it takes the voice of a child to remind you that you're worth fighting for. The custody battle that followed was brutal, but Sophie's testimony changed everything. When the judge heard a 10-year-old girl calmly explain how her father had been lying, manipulating, and planning to abandon his family, the carefully constructed narrative Michael had built crumbled completely. The affair came to light. The financial manipulation was exposed. The recordings Sophie had secretly made on her tablet conversations where Michael discussed his strategies for destroying my credibility became evidence that no amount of expensive legal representation could overcome. Michael lost everything, not just the divorce settlement, but his business partnership with Amanda, his reputation in the community, and most importantly, his daughter's respect. The court awarded me full custody with supervised visitation for him, and the financial settlement reflected the true nature of his betrayal. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching Sophie heal from the trauma of carrying adult secrets, of feeling responsible for protecting me from truths I already knew. We went to therapy together, learning how to rebuild trust and communication after months of lies and manipulation. "I'm sorry I had to be the one to tell you about Dad," she said one evening as we sat together on the couch, working on a puzzle. "You didn't have to protect me, sweetheart," I told her. "That's my job to protect you, but someone had to tell the truth," she said with the simple wisdom that only children possess. And all the grown-ups were too scared to do it. 6 months later, we moved into a smaller house that was truly ours. Sophie decorated her room exactly how she wanted it, and I started my graphic design business again, working from home so I could be there when she got off the school bus. Michael remarried Amanda and moved across the country. Sophie sees him twice a year now, and their relationship is slowly rebuilding on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. Sometimes I watch my daughter playing in our backyard and marvel at her strength, her courage, her refusal to accept lies just because they came from someone she loved. She taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt trapped by someone else's lies or manipulation, remember this: truth has a voice, and sometimes it speaks through the people we least expect. Children see what adults choose to ignore, and their courage can light the way to freedom. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. There are people out there being told they're crazy for seeing the truth, being gaslit by those who should protect them. Stories like this remind us that we're worth fighting for, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to sign away our dignity. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth defending.